Okay, here we go. Alrighty.
Hello, Mercurianians. How's everybody doing today?
We are just getting started. As soon as I get the page ready, we'll get the link and I'll tweet it out. Okay. So, one moment.
Can everybody hear me just fine?
Yeah, I can hear you well. How do I sound?
You sound good.
All right. Oops, let me silence that. Okay, if you want to retweet it, I just tweeted from the Mercs.
Oh, got you. Alrighty, Mercurianians.
Hey, this is a really exciting episode.
Yeah, it is. This is a fun one. We're looking forward to it. You
Yeah,
tweeted from the Mercs?
yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So, today is an exciting conversation. Everybody's
Yeah.
super familiar with aspects, and typically when you say the word aspect, you think of the zodiac signs. But today we're going to be taking a little bit of a different approach to aspects.
Yeah. So we are, like you said, everyone's thinking, two-dimensional, like in the zodiac aspects, but today we're going hyperdimensional. So we're going out of the ecliptic system and going into the equatorial system. We're working like in mundo, which literally just means like in the world, like in physical local space. What aspects look like astronomically, visually to you when you're outside?
Yeah, so this is used like pretty commonly by a lot of sidereal astrologers today. But it kind of fell out of like the Western tradition. So Kenneth Bowser, we watched his ESAR lecture together. We were in his lecture
Mhm.
at ESAR,
Yeah.
and we talked about it a little bit like on the way, and like it's so crazy on the way up to Salem later, but
Mhm.
I could not believe that like it's not spoken about like at all.
I know
Really.
it's like it's hard to find a lot of like really any resources on like these topics. Kenneth Bowser's definitely done a lot of work with them, so it was cool to like watch his lecture at ESAR. But yeah, I remember like that car ride, we had like 8 hours and we were just like reading this chapter like over and over, trying to, really think about it and like talk about what it meant and like looking at it in our charts. So it's cool to like finally talk about it here now and like look at some examples and show Stellarium and like really get our minds situated with the concept, because it's hard to just read from the book um to really get what he's saying, but hopefully we're going to make it easy to understand and yeah, just break it down for everyone.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of a like mind or cog turner, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah,
Yeah, it
it's going to
takes
take
a
time to sink in if it's new, probably.
And like we're not professionals. I mean, we're professionals, but like we're not like the most knowledgeable people in the world on
Yeah,
this.
I mean it's
Like
it's an
we've
advanced topic in itself. It's hard to,
hmm
yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I definitely recommend you stick around for this one because it's really fun. And once you start to see it in action,
It's so cool.
yeah,
I
like you
know.
can't
It's
miss
just like
it.
it zips you out of like the two-dimensionality of a chart. It just like makes it so like pop alive in your face. It's really cool. So we're pretty much going to be looking at like um he introduces that there's three different kinds of ways to calculate aspects. So we're going to look at two of them. The third one is the one that you probably already know and are familiar with, which is just by degree in the zodiac, like what figures are they meeting by? Um and then
Right.
yeah,
Are they
mundane.
sex? Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say we're looking at mundane and temporal as like the other two kinds.
Yeah, and like straightforward, are they sextile? Are they signs of the same sect? Like trines, are they of the same element?
Right. Yeah.
Oppositions, yeah.
That's all
So,
old stuff. We're gonna talk about all the new stuff
uh-huh.
today.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
the only other things I wanted to say really quickly was you don't need an exact birth time for this method too, which is cool, because the idea is that these positions of the planets are as they are on that day, and that if we're looking at slower planets, they're not going to move a ton. So the mundo aspects will retain. The other thing too, of course, is that sidereal tropical doesn't matter because it's not a zodiac issue at all. That's the whole thing with this, is we're not looking at the zodiac degrees as they're projected onto the ecliptic. It's not the ecliptic system. We're getting into the equatorial system.
Yes. And what's really, really fascinating about that is that it gives you a different way to like analyze planetary interactions through aspects. Like
Hmm.
you're looking at like raw planetary archetype and how those two archetypes connect through the nature of said aspect.
Hmm.
So it's a little bit different than just the zodiac aspects
Right.
because there's it's a little bit more independent.
Yeah. So, and with that, like I said, we'll step into Stellarium. So hopefully we can give some really nice visuals to really ground it. But yeah, I mean, besides that, I think that's pretty much it. So if we're ready to hop into chapter 15.
Yes. Also, I will say, I don't think there's any software that can really like do this for you, at least the temporal aspects. But
Mm.
it's not that hard. It's not that
Yeah,
hard.
we're gonna guide you through it. We'll walk your hands
Mhm.
as we do a few examples of like calculating a temporal aspect with ascensional times together, which sounds complicated, but it's not that bad.
Especially because we're not calculating the ascensional times
Yeah, if you had right.
ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah, if
that's already taken care of.
uh-huh.
But also just
Thanks,
quick,
AstroSeek.
yes, I know. Quick shout out. We have Neha who said hi and Ethan who said so ready. So awesome. Thank you guys.
Hello.
We got
Thank you
a
for
Yeah, we've
joining.
got a couple other people on, so this is super exciting. So, yeah, we'll get into chapter 15. This is, I feel like, just such an infamous chapter because it's kind of in the middle of like very elementary definitions, and then he like goes right into like these two 3D and like I kind of cheekily said on Twitter the other day, like 3D and 4D aspects, which is really like kind of how you could conceive of like a mundane being like in three dimensions and the temporal being like three dimensionals and time like relevant. So anyway, he just jumps into this kind of after talking about the melothesia.
Right. He's
Very
like,
basic.
the body parts ruled by the signs. And then
Yeah.
he's like, here's all this fucking math for you. Like,
Yeah. Right.
do you want me to start with the first paragraph? I forget who started last week.
Um, yes, you can go ahead and start off.
Okay. All right. So
We might
before
also
we
just
begin,
oh yeah. Oh
our
yes.
copies came from the AFA, James Holden's translation. You can order it online in store. And there are also like there's a big chunk of this translation from Google Books for free online.
Mhm.
And there are translations from the Horoi project.
Mhm.
Does Hand or Schmidt? I don't know. I feel like I've heard of Schmidt's. I could
There
be
was never a
wrong.
Project Hindsight translation volume that was published of Rhetorius.
Right.
Yeah, that I don't. He probably did read it, but I don't think it was ever like
Okay.
had booklets for like Hephaestus and Valens and everything, but I don't think it was.
Right. Yeah.
There was
I
maybe
feel like,
excerpts in like there was one where he had like a compilation of astrologers, like
mhm.
excerpts maybe in that one, but I can't remember.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I know that Laszlo has a great resource for Rhetorius as well.
Yeah,
So check it out.
yeah. And also I was just gonna say in like, do you want to maybe like pause like that first paragraph because there's a lot. So we'll just
Yeah.
take that step by step. Oh, hey
Yeah.
Finn. Finn is here. Hello.
Hey Finn. Hello.
All right. Okay.
Um,
So yeah,
all right.
we'll
So,
start.
chapter 15, page 14, trines and squares and oppositions, and those that are disjunct with each other as with the oppositions.
I just wanted to say that intro is like that just is very ambiguous to what we're talking about, which is really, really funny. But anyway,
I agree. Yeah. So they established differences among trine and square and sextile aspects. And the first and greatest of all is taking by degree according to the handy tables of Ptolemy, as we shall point out farther along. The second is the temporal, which Antigonus and Phanes the Egyptian, and some others established and named equilateral triangle and the rising of the signs. The third is the zodiacal or common and general into which we all wander. So let's
yeah.
pause there. Yeah. So he says, first and foremost, most importantly, we've got these mundane aspects. You
Mhm.
use them with Ptolemy's handy tables. It's how you calculate it. And then the second is the temporal. So this is what's factoring in these ascensional times and how long it takes. And
Mhm.
so I just think that's really, really fascinating that he puts those two things
Before,
explicitly,
yeah.
says the first and greatest of all.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, so he throws the general or the, yeah, what does he say? The
the
common aspect,
common.
zodiacal, into which we all wander, like the ones that we're all familiar with. But then
Hmm.
introduces says, but they're the others too, and I'm writing them first because they're they're just as powerful, if not more, than the little, zodiacal degrees, because they're real. They're real in time and in space. The zodiac, it's real, but like it's real in like its own projected kind of oblique way. We can draw a circle and make it 360 degrees, but it's not real like that out there. The other two ways are real out there.
Right.
So,
Like if you look at the sky,
mhm,
visually, half of your aspects are going to look different.
right,
So, let alone the whole entire constellation that visually the planets fall into in the ecliptic.
right.
So, this says forget all of that
Hmm. Yeah.
and pay attention to this. All right. So, for many times, with the Sun in Leo around the first degree and Jupiter in Sagittarius around the fifth degree, there appeared to be a trine of Jupiter to the Sun, but it was the inactive configured with each other. For neither were they posited platically within the 120 degrees, nor were they placed temporally within the 120 horary times, nor within 120 degrees of rising time. So here we have an example with the Sun in Leo, 1 degree of Leo, and Jupiter in Sag, 5 degrees of Sagittarius, right?
Mhm.
So they're positive platically, it's a loose aspect, it's not a partile aspect. Nor were they placed temporally within the 120 horary times. So that is another reference to temporal aspect and ascensional times. And then finally, nor within 120 degrees of rising time.
Hmm. Yeah, so he's basically just saying there are these other two ways we can calculate it, that by mundane aspect or by the temporal aspect, they aren't actually a trine outside, if you were out there looking at it or timing it.
Hmm. And then there's a little note from someone else who had this text later. The rest then comes from the chapters about the planets.
Hmm.
And then now the triangular side is always called zodiacal, which again had force. This is a reference to just that trine,
Hmm.
since neither the degree wise nor the time wise embraced it. So it wasn't a mundane aspect and it wasn't a horary aspect.
Hmm.
So it's a zodiacal aspect, which is still strong. He's not just like dismissing it.
Hmm.
Now, since we have established the side of the trines and squares and sextiles by degree in what follows through the tables of Ptolemy, now we have indicated the zodiacal, having believed it necessary to add also the temporal by an example.
Hmm.
So, first example, he says we have a zodiacal example here. So, next we're going to give you an example for a temporal aspect and how that works.
Yeah. So the next page is basically he's giving the procedure of how you calculate a temporal aspect using ascensional times. So there's a lot of numbers. So I also just want to say, like, still hold on, because once we get a chart out here, it's going to make a lot more sense, and you're going to see the difference about what these all these different things are. But yeah, this next paragraph that I'll read is a little bit, number heavy. So just do your best to follow along, and the examples will make it very clear. So suppose the sun to be in Aries in the first degree in the clime of Alexandria. And also, if you aren't aware, when the authors talk about clime or klima, they're talking about latitude, because in different latitudes on the Earth, the ascensional times, so the times it takes the signs to rise, are all different. So he's saying if you're in Alexandria, Egypt, um, with the sun in Aries in the first degree, Jupiter in Leo in the second degree, and Mars in Leo in the fifth degree, he says, I do thus. So I'm going to do this calculation. So the rising of Aries is 21 degrees and 40 minutes of horary times, aka, you know, these many degrees past the midheaven in right ascension, which again, if we're going to try to look at Stellarium to hopefully make a little bit of sense of the astronomy happening here, but all you have to really understand is that there's a number associated with each time's ascensional period. And we're going to be adding these numbers as kind of equivalent ways of doing degree-based calculations like we do in a two-dimensional way. So we're converting time to degrees or numeric values, really. So of Aries is 2140, the rising of Taurus is 25, and the rising of Gemini is 2820, and the rising of Cancer is 3140. And the times of these four make 10640. So he just said from 0 Aries all the way through Taurus, through Gemini, through the end of Cancer, if you add up those ascensional values, which again, there are softwares that will calculate that for your natal location, you add them all up, they're 106 degrees and 40 minutes of Hori time. And so that's less than 120 by 13 degrees and 20 minutes. So what he's saying is from 0 Aries to 0 Leo, right? That's 4 signs, which is 120 degrees in the zodiac. When you add up the ascensional values, they only add to 106. So it's less than 120 by 13 degrees and 20 minutes. So now he basically gives a procedure for going backwards to find what degree in Leo that it will actually fall. Because at 0, it's not 120 yet. So it'll be a little bit later temporally by time that the trine actually happens. So he's going to figure out how to find the degree where the temporal aspect completes. But we're going to look later on that going backwards like this is harder. So what you all really need to do is just look at an aspect that already exists. And then you find the ascensional times between the planets. And you don't need to worry about this math part. So just listen to it, bear with it, but we're not going to really show this part because we're going to do it backwards like the other way, which is way easier. So he says, I'll find this degree where the temporal aspect is 120 degrees around 11.5 Leo. For doubling 35 times, which is the ascension of Leo, double 35, it's 70. Do 11.5 times that value. I find 805 times, which I then divide by 60, which makes 13 degrees and 25 minutes. I combine the 106 with that 13 he just found, and the sum is 120 degrees of temporal time. And so the 11.5 degree of Leo in the climb of Alexandria is found to be the side of an equilateral triangle, prognosticating or proving to be the temporal trine of the first degree of Aries. And we say that Jupiter is beheld by the sun zodiacally and temporally. So he's showing that when we calculate the ascensional times, it takes actually a little bit longer than 120 degrees of the zodiac to rise for the temporal piece to equal 120. Because at 0 Leo, it's only 106. But at 11 Leo, when 11 Leo is on the ascendant, then 120 ascensional times have passed.
Right. Yeah. And so, like, I know that that's some crazy math.
Yeah.
It might have made more sense to follow that procedure when you were calculating the entire chart by hand. Maybe it was just really easy to work into your other calculations.
Mm-hmm.
But for our sake, we're gonna give it a little shortcut.
Yeah.
So the next two paragraphs in this chapter are him repeating that same process just to show that even though they're not falling exactly 120 degrees away zodiacally, that they will line up to a perfect equilateral triangle for all 3 signs, and shows where that exact Hori trine falls in that sign.
Right. So yeah, he'll just show that like that 11 Leo by temporal aspect, it actually falls later on at like 18 Scorpio. So we think of that, that's a little over a square, right? But temporally, because those signs are long ascension, it takes way longer, and actually a trine passes by time.
Yes, I also want to say, if long and short ascension are not super familiar for you, we talked a ton about it at the beginning of our Antisha and Contra Antisha videos. So definitely check those out if you're not totally certain. But yeah, ascensional times, long and the short of it, how long does it take it to rise above the horizon at this specific location on Earth?
Yeah. So again, he's just doing this math from the rest of the chapter, which we're not going to read, to show that we're going to find degrees that if you plot the 3 on the wheel, it doesn't look like a triangle. But temporally, because the ascensional times are skewed, and in some places they stretch things out, and in some places they squish them down, it actually is equal, even though it won't look like a geometric trigon or triangle. So that's it. That's all we're going to read. And now we're going to look at examples and make it hopefully a lot clearer.
So if you have questions, feel free to comment them. And as we go through like this demonstration in Stellarium, we'll definitely make a point to address it.
Yes. So also Gabe and Jared have sent hearts. So Hey Gabe, hey Jared.
Hello,
Nicer. I know.
friends.
I love doing this live. It's just much nicer, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And also especially for this, where if people have a question, we can address it because it's murky. All right, so I'm gonna open up Stellarium. We're gonna hop right into it. Okay, here we go. Let's get everything situated just right. So we're gonna display this, this meridian, vertical, full zenith. Okay, I think that's pretty much it, right?
Yeah, I think we're good. I don't think we need the equatorial grid.
Yeah, okay. So I will throw on the horizon, so that's a little bit easier to see at first. So
Mm,
what we're looking at here is all of the great circles. Oh, the celestial equator isn't on, actually. Do we want to have that on at the beginning? I think we were just going to show that.
later.
Um, wait, why isn't it displaying? This is the celestial equator. Oh, it is.
Oh,
Wait,
yeah.
yeah, I see the
Wait.
line, but it's not the right color. Or at least it was a more
Oh,
vibrant pink
yeah. It just
before.
blends right in.
I don't know why.
It's okay. We can just
Okay,
gesture to it with the
yeah,
mouse.
yeah. So essentially, we are
But
looking
boom.
at, yeah, we're looking,
Essentially.
yeah. So really what we're looking at here is the great circles, which is like if you held a sphere in your hand and you draw circles that completely go around the sphere that aren't ovals, they aren't like only part, like they have a full diameter. Um, the most important ones are the horizon, which is literally just the flat plane horizontally around you. And then the next most important ones are, I think I'll actually put on the azimuthal grid instead of the equatorial grid, just so we can see the prime
Mhm.
vertical and the meridian really clearly.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so this is your local space. So essentially what we're looking at is if you look at your four directions, we know that the meridian is defined as the great circle that passes from north to south in your local space. So it's fixed. It has nothing to do with the ecliptic or the stars. It's about direction.
Hmm.
So when you stand outside, you look north to south, this red line here, this is the meridian that will always go north to south, and it will pass through the zenith. So the zenith is the point straight up above you, the highest point in the sky. And
Hmm.
then in contrast to that, we have,
And
oh yeah, go ahead.
and the midheaven is the intersection between that meridian and the ecliptic.
Right. So when we do look at the stars and the planets and the zodiac and the ecliptic, this is where the midheaven's defined.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily the highest place the ecliptic is in. Like, right, so
Right.
Saturn is actually higher in declination, right, in like his ascension above the horizon over here than actually at the midheaven earlier on. Well, also, well, things tilt, so maybe that was a bad example, but that's why these
Right.
things are difficult to grasp. There's kind of a lot of moving parts. So when then the other really important great circle is just the prime vertical, which is the east to west. So this again is fixed. It doesn't move. If I rotate the sphere, you see the ecliptic, the stars, the celestial equator move. Or sorry, the celestial equator doesn't move. It's a fixed based off of your location. This is it. So I'm going to turn off the azimuthal grid, which is the green grid. And I think, do you want to throw on the equatorials for a minute just to see this view as well?
Yeah.
So when we actually look at the rotation of the prime mobile or the 10th sphere, it's rotating along the pole star, which is right over here. So the NCP is the northern celestial pole. And again, that's going to look different based off of where your location is. So this is in the northern hemisphere. But if I actually move our location to Quito, Ecuador, which is right on the equator, you'll see that now the poles are on the horizon because you're on the equator. And what happens is that the prime vertical moves to conjoin the celestial equator because it's all become a right sphere. So they call this like the right sphere. Everywhere else on the earth has like an oblique sphere. But if you're on the equator, then you get this nice, easy kind of situation where it just turns like this. You can literally watch things rise straight up.
Hmm.
but the ecliptic is still offset from the celestial equator. And so it moves back and forth like a sine wave.
Right. And so the ecliptic, all of the planets pass through the ecliptic from Earth's perspective, right?
Mhm.
And so when a planet is out of bounds, when their declination varies, they're either going to be above or below that precise ecliptic middle center.
Mhm.
So just keep that in mind as you mess around with this, that declination also plays a role in the visual experience of it.
Right. Or actually, I'll go back to London, because this is still set for our friend's chart, who we'll look at in a minute. Um, so I'm going to turn the celestial equator off. I'm sorry, the equatorial grid. But the idea is that that's the grid we're working with for all these aspects. So what we're looking at, what is a mundane aspect? What does it mean when these things move into a configuration by a mundane square? What we're looking at is a planet being on the ascendant. Now, the ascendant is right here. The ascendant is defined as the intersection of the horizon with the ecliptic. And the midheaven is not the meridian. The meridian is the whole great circle. So the midheaven is the intersection of the ecliptic with the meridian. And the IC, or the lower midheaven, is defined as the intersection of the ecliptic and the meridian in the south. So like way down here. And so what we're looking for is a planet to be simultaneously on the meridian and on the horizon, which could be the ascendant and descendant, or the midheaven and nadir, or lower midheaven. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to me, it does.
I
I
know.
hope that,
So we just have
yeah,
to
I
like keep
hope.
talking it out and like showing it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I mean, just a couple, I don't know, just a couple extra additional things like right ascension. It's the distance from an object from the first point of Aries or the vernal equinox and above. I don't know. I'm so bad at explaining this.
Yeah,
It's
it's like the distance along the celestial equator, basically, but like with
mhm,
respect to zero Aries, the Aries point over here.
right.
Because yeah, declination and right ascension are basically how you measure coordinates in the equatorial system, which again equals this grid. So the
Right. So
rotation, yeah,
that's like that's like outer space. It's like if we the way that we measure like latitude and longitude on Earth, we're kind of taking that same principle of measuring like height, distance, angularity, stuff like that, but from a non-Earth centered perspective, right? Like we're stepping outside of Earth and looking at the full celestial system that we're in.
right. So do we want to hop into AstroSeek and look at whose chart this is and see how the chart that we're used to looking at is not quite what we see when we look up at the sky or in Stellarium. So let me share my screen here. Oops. So this is our friend William Lilly's birth chart. So this was May 11, 1602, 2 a.m. in Daysworth in UK, Great Britain. And what we're going to be highlighting here is his Moon-Saturn relationship. So if anyone's live in the comments, does anyone want to tell us what aspect, by zodiacally, what aspect is forming between the moon and the Saturn? So from Scorpio to Capricorn, I know there's going to be a little delay here. So let's see if we get
It's
it.
really weird to like watch that while you're in the live.
I know it's a little bit trippy.
Uh-huh.
Um, oh, maybe I should go back to the chart. Um,
Right.
yeah,
So the moon in Capricorn and Saturn in Scorpio.
right. I don't see it. Oh, yes. Okay. Sextile, sextile. Great. Right. It looks like a
Cool.
sextile. It is an applying sextile, right? Within 4 degrees, it's getting closer and closer to 60 degrees of ecliptic distance between them. But if we go into Stellarium, what we find is that where he was born, So this is from London in 1602, May 14th. Or wait, is it? Yeah, it's May 11th. Whoops, let me actually track back a few days. That's off. May 11th. Okay. So here's the moon and here's the Saturn. And let me put the horizon back on. So we saw the moon and Saturn were kind of both up on either side of the midheaven or meridian. So that's what we're seeing here. So there's the moon and there's the Saturn. And again, there's about 60 degrees of ecliptic between them. But what we're looking at here is that in the mundane sphere, so as we turn this, what actually happens is that when we put them on the angles, they are simultaneously rising and culminating. So boom, it's a mundane square. It's an in mundo aspect. They're on the angles together, even though ecliptically, that's not what it looks like.
Right. So that is that like moment of connection that we're talking about, that will drastically alter the experience of those planets, you know?
Right.
So, I mean, the moon is applying to Saturn. Saturn is retrograde in Scorpio. So the moon already in from the zodiacal aspects, the moon is already having a kind of tumultuous relationship with Saturn.
Mhm.
But when we take that and we put it in the mundane sphere, we can see that we have a square happening. It's not
Right.
just a sextile, it's a square that
Mhm.
really testifies to that challenge.
Right. And what we'll see generally is that when you have an aspect, and this is a point we'll reemphasize too when you're looking in your own chart, if you have an aspect in signs of long ascension, so from Cancer to Sagittarius, they get stretched out. So things move like slower, it's longer, it's like stretched out. So a sextile becomes a square and a square becomes a trine. And Ptolemy talks about this, saying that when you do these primary directions, what happens is that if it's a sextile with a malefic, it could actually kill. It could be an anaretic or killing aspect because it's actually a mundane square, which is harmful to the life force. So same thing in the inverse for the fast ascension. What they do is they squish. So they make a trine harmful. They make a trine a square. A trine in signs of fast ascension can kill, and the square becomes a nice sextile. I was thinking too of maybe just showing. I did put together just a few examples here. This is Regiomontanus. So in his chart, you can just see here, what we have here is the cusps are all evenly proportioned, because again, when you're outside looking at the sky, the houses are equal slivers, and there's different segments of ecliptic that fall in each sliver. But like we look at this 11-degree Gemini Mercury on this setting point in the west, Jupiter right on the MC, they're in an exact trine zodiacally, but they're both in a mundo square. Nostradamus had this crazy T-square going on. Moon and Pisces on the midheaven, we already see that the sun and Saturn are opposite each other zodiacally, but when they set, the moon's on the midheaven. But think about this, 14 Cancer and 21 Pisces is pretty close to a trine. But because it's a fast ascension, it squishes things. So that trine becomes squished into a square, and it turns into a mundo paran or square. Paracelsus, same thing. Scorpio, Capricorn, same thing that we just saw with Lily's chart. It's a sextile. The in mundo is actually a square. They're both on angles. And Paracelsus also had Sun, Jupiter. So.
And so I want to mention that although, oh, sorry, I just totally hit my mic. So, oh, can you put the charts back up, please?
Oh yeah, sorry.
It's okay. Um, although all of these examples, they are on the angles, as we saw with Lily's chart, it doesn't have to be on the angle in the nativity. It can be in a cadent house, and it still, if it has that mundane aspect, there is still that like intensification that occurs.
Right. That's a great point. I know like David Cochran calls them kind of like rotated parans. Like in that lecture, a woman was complaining like, well, how does it matter that if on the same day, then everyone's going to have them hit the angles. It's like they're not on the angles when they're born. But A, it doesn't matter because they retain the mundane aspect wherever they're sitting. And B, what doesn't matter anyways, that everyone's going to have their primary directions timed differently to when they hit the angles. So when you actually look at the timing, it doesn't matter that some aspects are mundane for everyone in that latitude for the day because their PDs or their primary directions are going to time it totally differently for everyone.
And like sometimes that the strength of an angle or the intensity, maybe so to say, instead of strength, because strength has a little bit more autonomy,
Mm.
sometimes the intensity that you have with angular houses is highlighted in a cadent part of your life, you know? So that's like a really crucial part of people's life stories. Like I might be getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but with the example with Lily,
Mm.
like we have some things to talk about with like Gadbury and like just what was going on in that era. Do you want to like open that discussion now? Did you want to save that for a little later?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're pretty much almost good to move out of Mundo squares. The only other thing I wanted to really just emphasize was like Mundo squares, like if you have this in your chart, so if there was a time in the day you were born when two planets were on angles together, like they bring power, they bring eminence, they bring huge emphasis to these two planets, the topics that they rule, and emphasizing that somehow these two things merge into like a major story in your life. And also it maybe highlights actually a square relationship between planets that otherwise were maybe in a sextile or a trine. So that was just kind of what I wanted to emphasize, that yeah, look at air aspects in short of long ascension. If they're in either half, they're going to get squished or stretched, and they might turn into a Mundo square. And the other point too about planets in latitude that you mentioned, like it might look like it's off a bit if they have like a lot of latitude away from the ecliptic. Do you want to mention that?
I was just saying that like if they have a like if the latitude from the ecliptic is too far, it looks different. And
Mm.
so like the degree zodiacally that's setting, so like right now, this is happening with Venus and Jupiter.
Mm.
Look at your time nomad or astrogold or whatever. You'll
Mm.
see when Venus sets, her zodiacal degree sets before she visually falls beneath the horizon. And
Mm.
so that's just something to keep in mind, take into account. You want the aspects as tight as possible. Kenneth Bowser says that he uses 2 to 3 degrees of orb. So some food for thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, just take that into account, you know, and also like if the zodiacal degree is setting, but the planet itself is still above the horizon, what does that have to say? If
Mm.
the equatorial degree, I mean, the ecliptic degree sets, but visually the planet is still above the horizon. How does that translate to your life? Do things
Right.
feel like they're finished and they're just not? You know, is there this kind of after effect that you experience? It could be a lot of different things.
Mm.
But that declination variety can also allow for planets to be in mundo aspect when they just when you wouldn't expect them to be.
Mm. Yeah, and definitely if you have three planets that move into like a Mundo T square, that's like super eminent.
Yeah.
Like Kenneth Bowser gave a great example of like Bonaparte that had like this crazy Jupiter Uranus Sun Mundo T square that's like in the aspects of his in the zodiacal aspects there was like nothing really eminent. There was nothing even partile. The closest thing was like a Moon Saturn opposition that like wasn't very highlighting the rulerships
Favorable.
of like what that would have made like a freaking like worldly like. But then when you go in Mundo and you looked at this configuration he showed, like sun on the midheaven, the Jupiter, it makes things come to life that otherwise you can't see. So you really have to
Right.
look at them. The only other thing I think I wanted to mention really about the Mundo aspects is that he in the lecture showed that the best way to really calculate this is by using a speculum or like a table of sidereal times, like a 4-column table of times that will show you in the sidereal time, which basically just says like, 9 hours or like 9 a.m. Imagine like it'll be like sun and then rise, MC, set, IC. It'll be like 9 a.m., 12 p.m., 5 p.m. and like 11 p.m. It'll have the time that each in one day, each planet hits all 4 angles. And what you do is you just look for when, 9:40 a.m. Jupiter rise, and also 33 Saturn set or Saturn MC. It's like you can find it with those sidereal tables. And I think You can calculate those with Janus, Sirius, or Nova chart wheels. And Stellarium can also do it, but it's not as like tabulated and nice to see as the programs that already calculate.
Yeah. And also another name, speculum. You might have also heard that called a speculum. The first time I heard that term, I was like, what? But yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another
He made
avenue.
the joke in the lecture, like not the obstetrical instrument. The yeah. Um, so
So
yeah, that's mundane
yeah,
aspects.
let's talk just a little bit about Lily's life experience.
Mhm.
So, just really briefly, I think it's super relevant that he produced an English manual for astrological delineation what and during a time where English was the language of the poor, the common folk. It was not an elite dialect at all. And so taking that astrological knowledge and sharing it with people who were not part of the elite community was controversial at the time. It definitely sparked some issues. A lot of people loved it, a lot of people hated it. As well as that situation with Gadbury. I'm not like the most knowledgeable on all of his drama, but like I know that Gadbury was rude to him and like kind of like
Betrayed. Yeah.
what
Kind
did
of
you say?
kind of betrayed him. Again, I don't know a lot about it, but like it was a pretty
Mhm.
hostile situation. And like, do you want to talk about like the chart, what we see here? Like
Right.
Saturn,
Yeah.
right? Like Saturn kind of ruling the 12th house of hidden enemies, and then in the domicile of Mars in Scorpio, and Mars is on the descendant of open enemies. So there's like a reception happening here, but like you see the zodiac and they're in a, applying sextile, which is like, okay. And then we say, okay, well, in Mundo, is it actually a square? Well, it's not, because you can see Mars is only a few degrees from setting, but the MC is kind of way over there. So they're not going to form a Mundo square. That brings us to the temporal aspect, which is essentially what we're going to do right now. So I'm going to kind of change my screen so you can see everything, and I will share the calculator, and we're going to do a little bit of math. So bear with us, but it's not going to be that bad. So if you're on AstroSeek, you can calculate this in the traditional chart calculator. If you scroll down to ascensional times or rising times, what we're going to look at is we want to calculate the ascensions in ascensional time between the Mars and the Saturn. So Mars is at 6 degrees. So there's 24 left. Then we have all of Libra and then the first 18 of Scorpio. So what we're going to do is take the value assigned to each sign in its ascensional time, divided by 30. So that's the value of this ascensional time for each degree. And then multiply by the degrees remaining for Mars. We'll just simply add all of Libra, and then we'll do the same procedure in Scorpio, divide that value by 30, and then multiply it by 18. And we're going to add those three figures together and see if it equals something that's not 60, which I don't think it will. So we'll start off. Virgo, the ascensional value is 43.46. So I'm going to punch that in the calculator, and we're going to divide it by 30. So that's the value for each degree, 1.4488. And we said there's around 24 degrees left for Mars to rise. Mars at 6:30, so there's about 23 and a half. So I'm going to take this value here and multiply it by 23.5. And that's 34.03. So you'll want to write that down, 34.03. Now clear that. Now we have all of Libra, 43.46. Okay, there's our next number. Write down 43.46. Now with Scorpio, the total value of ascensions for the sign is 43.37. We're going to divide that by 30. So here's the value in Scorpio for each degree. And actually, you'll see that these are signs of equal ascension, right? These are signs that are contra Antitia. So it's the same value as the one we calculated for Leo. And then we'll multiply it by the 18 degrees of ascension that Saturn has already completed, and we get 26.022.
And so when we add those three numbers together, we
Mm-hmm.
get 93 degrees.
Right. So we're going to add, I'll take this and I'll add the 43.3 or 43.46. Oop, 69. And then we add the 34. from the remaining ascensions in Virgo. Oh shoot. I did that. I knew this was gonna happen. Hold on. I just did this was my error. Let me come back here. So Scorpio's ascension, it's 43,
Oh, it
37.
says,
I think
oh,
oops, oh my goodness, what am I doing? Divided by 30. There's the same
well,
value.
it says the
8.
value for per degree just to the right of the rising time in the
Oh,
column.
yes. You could also be taking that value right there.
We
Wow.
were doing this all last night too, and I just noticed that.
That's very handy. And
Uh-huh.
we're just seeing that.
Saves you like 3-4 steps out of
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. So, okay, this was 26. That's the value for Saturn's ascensions. So we're going to take that, then plus all of Libra, 43.46. And then the remaining ascensions of Mars in Virgo was 34.
Oh no. Oh no.
Wait, this
What
isn't,
did we do different? What? Okay.
this is looks really bad. But you know what? We're going to make up for it. There's a temporal aspect sitting in here, and we're going to find it. Listen, guys, we know what we're talking about. I promise.
This is so funny. I'm sorry. Oh
This
my
is
goodness.
okay. Also, Jared said, is this the same concept as like parans with fixed stars? Yes. So we're basically doing a co-rising, co-culminating anything of a planet and a planet, but it can also be done with a fixed star at any minute. It's the same.
Yeah. Yeah, Kenneth Bowser incorporates fixed stars into his mundane aspect interpretations.
Yeah, like Kamala's got like a Jupiter, Saturn, Regulus kind of thing. Like he'll talk like in those combinations. And then Jared also said, interesting in year 1602 is the year that Kepler forecasted in this Fundamentals of Astrology thesis to explain how astrology works. Interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Yeah, that is really fascinating.
Jared always with the wisdom. So okay. A temporal aspect here. Well, look, at the end of the day, what it does show is that that value of 103 is much closer to 90 than it is to 60. Okay, so temporally, they are meeting with 103 degrees of horary time. And if we look at the Jupiter-Mars, that's a good one too. We did calculate that one earlier. That one's around 55 degrees. So if we pull out the calculator, so the rest of Mars again at 6, he's got 23.5 degrees times the value of 1.449. Oh, freak. 23.5 times 1.449. This value, and then plus Jupiter's at 13 degrees of Libra. So we're going to write down the 34. And then for Libra, we have a value of 1.449. Again, it's very similar because they're contrary to each other, the same. And Jupiter's going to be 13 degrees. So that's 18.87. So if we take that and add the 34 degrees from Mars, it is around 52. So again, they're in adjacent signs, but we see that temporally they're moving much closer to a sextile.
And in the northern hemisphere, that's because Virgo rises super freaking slow. Libra rises pretty darn slow.
Right.
Sorry, we made a little whoopsie daisy.
I know this was
Mercury
such a blunder, and I feel so bad
I do
because
too.
it's
We were
like that
so
was our example to really
excited.
ground it in. So maybe we'll have to make up for our blunder and just demonstrate another temporal aspect after we've like really looked at it. I really hope that
Right.
didn't confuse you guys, because the point still retained that if you just calculate the ascensions between the planets, imagine if it's 60, it's more sympathetic to a sextile. If it's 90, it's more sympathetic to a square. And it could be completely different, and probably is, than what it is zodiacally.
Right. And like the math is not super duper hard, like pretty straightforward.
Yeah,
Yeah, especially the way that Peter has it set up here with AstroSeek or Petter.
yeah,
Um, I always say his name incorrectly, but um,
yeah.
yeah. I hope that we were able to help like conceptualize this. I'm sorry that we made a whoopsie daisy. Mercury's combust in
I
Pisces.
know
That was
it's
totally our bad. I can't
um
help but laugh. That
I
is so
know.
crazy. We spent so much time too. We
Well, yes. Okay. So Jared just said it's good to make errors in astrology and then even better to spot them. If reviving ancient techniques was easy, it would have been done already. Thank you for the perspective, Jared. Yes, it's
wise words.
thank you. Yeah. And like we said, it's more just about if you just add these numbers together, what do they show?
And Rhetorius says that mundane aspects and temporal aspects are more important than zodiacal.
Mhm.
So even if you aren't so sure, you should be sure about what you have in your chart because there could be some hidden gems in there.
Right. So play with it, message us for more questions if you have any. Maybe we'll have to do another thing on this if people are curious. But yeah, I mean, Stella didn't have a ton of time, so we are sort of wrapping up. But yeah, that's the crux here is we just pull out Stellarium, or you can even just animate a chart like if I do hop into Astro Gold really quickly, if you have a software that can animate, you can also do it like this. So here's Lily's chart. And again, when we just move things back, you can watch this. See how close it's like over here. They're like so up close to the midheaven, but then astronomy is funny. And when you get the moon on the ascendant, Saturn's on the midheaven.
Right. And look how quickly that happens too, right? Like the moon fly when we go backwards in time, the moon just like flies back through that 12th house.
Mhm. Yeah. So you can definitely like play around with rotating your chart as an easy way. Again, if you have the other softwares, they can calculate the speculum tables to show the sidereal times when the planets are hitting angles. But you can also pull out Stellarium, which I think is the best way for everyone to do it because it's free. You can go online and use that software to just rotate the sphere on the day you were born and notice when planets are moving to angles together. And another layer onto this, which Jared did mention, is adding in the fixed stars. And like we mentioned, Kenneth Bowser does this pretty extensively. But I think we just wanted to talk about the planets first. Maybe later we'll do an episode where we can talk about when, yeah, if you've got a cool Mundo square and Sirius also happens to be setting at the same time, that adds a lot of value to this configuration. So Jared just said that makes sense. That Reddy sees them as so important because it's about the visual phenomena rather than the mathematical one.
Mhm.
And do you have an orb that you use? Yeah. So I would say definitely within 3 degrees or less,
Mhm.
especially. Oh yeah.
I would keep fixed stars pretty tight though, unless it's like
That's what's
Regulus, right?
right.
Like then maybe you
Right.
can give a little bit of orb.
Right. So for planets, definitely 3 degrees. For fixed stars, 1 degree. Because again, the idea is like if you're calculating a direction and you want to see the co-influence actually happen, if it's 3 degrees, it's like 3 years apart. If they're
Yeah.
within 1 degree on the angles, whether that's planet or planet star, they're coming on at like pretty much the same time. So the closer to partile or 1 degree, the better, but really not more than 3 degrees each from the angle.
Yeah.
Mhm. And not even like total distance off the angles. Like if Saturn is 1.5 and the moon's 1.5, like that's like all right. But if Saturn's 3 away when the moon's right on, that's like okay. But if the moon's 3 off and Saturn's 3 off, like that's too far. That doesn't
Yeah.
make sense there.
Yeah. So like if you were to cast a 90-degree point from one planet, it shouldn't be even if they're not exactly on the midheaven and the ascendant,
Mhm.
that mundane 90 degrees. You
Mhm.
want I don't know. I think it's good to try and ground one of them, like put one on the ascendant and let the other one have a little bit of orb. Like try not to let them both have orb because that's an
Right.
easier way that you can accidentally give it like 4 or 5 degrees, if they're both 2 degrees away from the ascendant and the midheaven.
Right. Yeah. So I mean, there's so many examples of these temporal aspects, and like I'll be honest, like I don't bust this out often, but like sometimes it's just a value to see, like in either in retrospect or if you are working with someone's chart and just doing something more, looking to pull something else out and you want to play around with calculating the ascensional times, like yeah, like you can often find something interesting and then start talking about like, oh well, by temporal, like these guys are an exact trine, and it's like that's going to show some total hidden benefic influence or supportive influence that's happening between the planets that you might not see otherwise. So I've definitely seen that when I have used them, which again is rare. I'm not an expert with these techniques. But yeah, I think we both just wanted to make this video to really clarify what chapter 15 is all about and give these examples. So again, a little bit of a blunder
Yeah.
with Lily's
But now
Mars
you know how
Saturn,
to do it,
right?
at
Uh,
least.
yeah. So I think with that, we're gonna wrap it up. And yeah, thank you guys for all being here. Does anyone else have any final questions before we sign off? Again, this is might take time to like sink in. It's great if you can to just play around in Stellarium and watch the things move and rotate and culminate. Um,
There is also some free content online about it for YouTube videos. Kenneth Bowser has a short little YouTube video
mm,
on it.
yeah,
And then
because
there are some sidereal astrologers who have made content on that as well. So yeah, check it out.
yeah. The last thing I wanted to say too is with the moon in a mundo aspect, because if you're actually rotating her throughout the day, she'll move a few degrees. That you have to be careful of
Mhm.
because we really want to have seen the moon not moving too far from the natal position at like the closest angle, really. So like say the moon's in the 12th, like if you rotate her to the ascendant and there's a mundo paran, like that's good. But if you have to make her like go back to when she was on the midheaven the day before, like there's not really anything. So just be careful if you're calculating mundo aspects with the moon because she's just too fast that it has to be very precise and close to the birth time or like the last or next angle she's moving to ideally.
It's a really good point.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yes, all right, that's it. Thank you guys
Yay.
so much for tuning in. And again, message us or whatever if you have other questions or need us to clarify anything or show, and maybe again, maybe we'll do another temporal aspect workshop. But yeah, thank you guys so much for hopping on and enjoy the Libra moon. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yes, have a great week, everybody.
All right, take it easy.
Peace.